let's start at the Supreme Court, because in a 6-3 decision, the High Court's conservative majority has ruled Louisiana's 2024 election map was, quote, a, quote, unconstitutional racial gerrymander. It delivers a significant victory for Republicans in a major decision that narrows the landmark Voting Rights Act. The High Court upheld a lower court ruling yesterday, saying the state's map makers relied too heavily on race when they redrew the state's voting boundaries. Justice Samuel Alito said for the majority, in part, quote, plaintiffs failed to show an objective likelihood of intentional discrimination. In the dissent, Justice Elena Kagan said the decision, quote, renders Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act all but a dead letter. This ruling goes well beyond the Louisiana map, though, because it effectively voids one of the last remnants of the Voting Rights Act without directly overturning the law, and opens the door for more partisan congressional maps that undercut voters' political power. President Trump and House Republicans and Democratic leadership all weighed in on this ruling yesterday.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's the kind of ruling I like.
They determined that the last map that was drawn for Louisiana was done unconstitutionally, and we've been saying that consistently from the beginning.
Today's decision by this illegitimate Supreme Court majority strikes a blow against the Voting Rights Act and is designed to undermine the ability of communities of color all across this country to elect their candidate of choice.
It's here. We're going to start with politics reporter at Semaphore, Dave Weigel. Dave, it's great to see you. Talk us through what this actually means from a brass tacks perspective.
The Kagan dissent is very helpful in explaining this, because you don't need to get too far into the weeds.
Yeah.
Before this week, there was a way to litigate and say that a state needed to draw a map with majority-minority districts. There is not really a good way to litigate that anymore. And you also saw an explanation of what's happening through the reactions of Republicans in red states in the South within hours of this decision. Marsha Blackburn, who's running for governor of Tennessee, posted a map of Tennessee that would cut basically Shelby County and Memphis into three pieces, eliminating a majority black seat that's actually represented by a white member of Congress. They all knew what it meant. It meant that the southern states that for 60 years have had to consider race in some capacity in drawing districts, and after the 90s in drawing majority minority districts, they don't need to anymore.
And I think that you were one of the people who have been tracking this quite closely, because you looked at one of the early executive orders and the way the Trump administration was trying, through an executive order, obviously this is a Supreme Court ruling, but trying to dismantle this, which of course has been a fear of voting advocates for decades now. Well,
the administration from day one was trying to dismantle all racial consideration, all racial preferences in policy. So for start administration, Trump is signing his January 6th pardons. He's also signing repeal of LBJ's original affirmative action order for the federal government, banning DEI in the federal government. And I saw some Republicans commenting on these districts, probably not ones who have to face a swing electorate, calling majority black districts DEI districts. This is the overall concept is that we're in a golden age of America. Remember that part. And that part of that is that we're post-racial country, and you don't need to consider race in this anymore. And if you notice that Republicans and Democrats both look at a map and say, this overwhelmingly black district is probably going to vote Democratic.
Yep.
What do we do about that? You're not supposed to notice that anymore. The official policy in everything is if there is any racial preference that benefits non-white people, it should be sued, litigated, driven out of existence, replaced with colorblind policies, which at the moment in these maps, again, just stick to the maps, would benefit white conservatives, because those are the people who are going to draw the maps in the South.
Yeah, because inevitably by being colorblind, you return to the very stasis of why you needed to acknowledge race in the first place, both politically and also in other environments where things like DEI were put in place in the first instance, which is to level the playing field, because innately it's not level and it's not colorblind. That's not the reality we live in. And so I think the question then becomes, how does this manifest in the multiple court challenges that are happening across the map? Because multiple states have redrawn their lines. It's not just Louisiana. That was just the one that happened to be in front of the court. But what does this mean now for places like California, Texas, Florida? You've seen a lot of maps get redrawn lately.
You have. I'd expect to see some litigation on how far it'll get against, for example, California. They redrew the maps. Voters approved these new maps. But race was a consideration in the way that they drew some districts. because that was the law, or that was the standard until this week. And I've seen some Republican chatter that maybe we can now find a judge who will say that was an unfair consideration of race in this. The main political partisan impact, which everyone's been noticing, and I've been referring to these tweets, is that Democrats see that a tool that in their view balanced the political makeup of the South is gone. So they were already talking, and you had this clip from the Hakeem Jeffries press conference. I was there. Yeah. The most interesting comment from that was to Terry Sewell from Alabama, where Republicans wanted to withdraw her seat away because it's also there are 2 voting rights districts that majority black in Alabama. She was saying it's fine if California wants to take this precedent and draw 52 out of 52 seats for Democrats. If Illinois wants to draw 17 out of 17 seats for Democrats, which would mean cracking the majority Latino, majority black, et cetera districts, and just you saw a version of this in Virginia. It was that you can draw from a safe blue area, overwhelm the rural areas. Yep. Republicans overwhelm safe blue areas with rural areas. They did this in Missouri. Kansas City is now split in half so that there's, instead of a Democratic district in Kansas City, half of Kansas City plus 200 miles of rural areas, the other half of Kansas City plus 200 miles of rural areas. Both parties, I'm not a both sides guy, but both parties are looking at this precedent and saying, okay, well, the old rules don't work. How do we maximize our power?
Well, now that the rule has been made, that's the reality that they are forced to live in until and unless the Supreme Court takes this up again. And given the way that there have been consistent rulings over the course of the past decade with this court, albeit with different justices in various seats, it has been a consistent chipping away at the protections of the Voting Rights Act. And so I think given that, and Democrats have spoken for a long time about the ways that they've had this concern about the court, was there a plan in place from Democrats to say, okay, if these protections are disappeared or neutered, which they are now, what do we do?
The plan was this state-by-state gerrymandering fight, really. So Democrats wouldn't come out and say, we think the court is going to do this, but they all believe this.
Yes.
I think Jeffries said it was expected. It was not what they wanted, but they expected. They could even tell who was going to who was going to write this decision. It was probably going to be Alito.
Yeah.
They knew how Alito was going to rule. So they've already been planning a post-Voting Rights Act world where they control a state. They are going to draw as many seats as possible. That was the response. And so you still hear rhetoric about how this is a triumph of democracy. 61 years ago, people fought and bled for the Voting Rights Act, but the court got rid of it. And so in the short term, their response is going to be trying to make up for the losses they're expecting in the South. Some this year, some states will do it in 2028. You saw this with Republicans in Mississippi and Alabama are saying, let's get ready for next time to eliminate their districts. That's the response. It's not, how do we go back and convince Sam Alito to change his mind? That ship has sailed. Yeah, that ship has sailed. And I also think that now we are in a period of mid-decade redistricting. Yes. Usually you would just see this every 8 to 10 years. Now we're going to be seeing this as a rolling domino effect that's going to be quite slow, I think, maybe to some of our viewers who aren't going to pay attention to this every day. But little by little, we will see these maps change and we will see these majority-minority districts eventually be diluted to the point where they don't exist. Yes, and Republicans will say that just because a minority district is not there doesn't mean voters can't elect a non-white candidate. And they'd point to, for example, Utah has Burgess Owens, who's retiring because, not to get too deep in the weeds there, but courts redrew the map. There's now a safe Democratic seat in Salt Lake City. He, a black conservative, decided he can't win it. And that is the conservative argument. That's the one that this court will win at this court probably for as long as it's in existence, that we're not in 1965 anymore. It's not Bull Connor's America anymore. We don't need these rules. But the limited impact right now is, especially in the South, 95% of black voters in the South vote for Democrats, and anyone can go in there and draw a map and say, we want a zero Democratic map. What do? Crack all the black areas. Yeah, and I think we're going to watch that in real time. Politics reporter at 7-4, Dave Weigel, you've been covering this for a long time. Thank you for coming on with us on an important morning. There is more news, though, for us to cover, because we were watching Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth yesterday make his first public appearance before Congress since the start of the war with Iran. Lawmakers pressed him on the rationale for starting this conflict in the first place, as well as the costs to Americans. Watch.
Their nuclear facilities have been obliterated. Underground, they're buried, and we're watching them 24/7. So we know where any nuclear material
reclaiming
might be.
My time for just a quick second here. We had to start this war, you just said, 60 days ago, because the nuclear weapon was an imminent threat. Now you're saying that it was completely obliterated?
They had not given up their nuclear ambitions, and they had a conventional shield of thousands of missiles.
So Operation Midnight Hammer accomplished nothing of substance. It left us at exactly the same place we were before. So much so that
their facilities were bombed and obliterated. Their ambitions continued.
Do you know how much it will cost Americans in terms of their increased cost in gas and food over the next year because of the Iran war?
I would simply ask you what the cost is of an Iranian nuclear bomb.
I'm going to give you that opportunity.
I would simply ask you what the... you're playing gotcha questions about domestic things. I'm not...
You're saying it's a gotcha question to ask what it's going to be in terms of the increased cost of gas.
Why won't you answer what it costs to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear bomb?
I give you that, sir, but let me...
What would it cost? What would you pay to ensure Iran doesn't get a nuclear bomb? What would you pay?
I reclaim my time. Do you not know? You had no one do the analysis of what the increased cost of gas and food on the American people are going to be?
What is the cost of Iran holding that straight at issue with nuclear weapons?
It's $631 billion, which means it's an increase of $5,000 a year for American households.
We talk about the process of how the U.S. makes foreign policy decisions sometimes on this show. Part of that right there is why, because you want to understand the impact of the actions that you take from a dollars and cents perspective, but also diplomatically through the region. And of course, according to new reporting from Axios, U.S. Central Command is set to brief President Trump today on new plans for potential military action in Iran. Sources with knowledge of the matter tell the outlet that CENTCOM Commander Admiral Brad Cooper, who gave the president a similar briefing back in February, just 2 days before these initial hostilities began, is going to lead that meeting. Joint Chiefs Chairman General Dan Kane is also expected to attend. He was on the Hill yesterday with Hegseth. Axios goes on to cite sources who say CENTCOM has prepared a plan for a, quote, short and powerful wave of strikes on Iran, including likely infrastructure targets, in hopes of breaking the negotiating deadlock they're in right now. Another plan expected to be shared with the president is focused on taking over part of the Strait of Hormuz to reopen it to commercial shipping. Yet another option that might come up is a special forces operation to secure Iran's stockpile of highly enriched uranium. The president, for his part, told Axios yesterday he sees the naval blockade on Iran as, quote, somewhat more effective than bombing. Two sources tell the outlet, however, that while Trump currently sees the blockade as his primary source of leverage, he would consider military action if Iran still won't cave. Meanwhile, Iran's president, in a new statement, has blamed the U.S. and Israel for the ongoing insecurity in the Strait of Hormuz. All of this is sending oil prices surging this morning, with the price of Brent crude hitting a 4-year high. One more story for your radar before we take a quick break. President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin spoke on the phone yesterday for more than an hour. A top advisor to Putin said the Russian president expressed his readiness for a short ceasefire coinciding with Russia's Victory Day celebrations on May 9th that marked the defeat of Nazi Germany in World War II on May 9th. President Trump discussed their conversation yesterday in the Oval Office. He also said he thinks the war in Ukraine might be settled before the war with Iran. Huh?
But I had a long talk with President Putin. I suggested a little bit of a ceasefire, and I think he might do that. He might announce something having to do with that. Did he announce it yet?
No, but I was wondering. I was just going to ask you.
No, I asked him about even if it's a little ceasefire. There's so many people being killed. It's so ridiculous.
Do you think the war in Iran ends first, or the war in Ukraine?
Well, we talked more about the war in Ukraine, but he would like to be of help. I said, before you help me, I want to end your war. So we had a good talk. I've known him a long time. I think he was ready to make a deal a while ago. I think some people made it difficult for him to make a deal, but we talked more about Ukraine.
But which war do you think ends first?
That's an interesting question. You know, coming from you, that's very interesting. Which war would end first? I don't know. Maybe they're on a similar timetable. I think Ukraine, militarily, they're defeated. Okay, you wouldn't know that by reading the fake news.
Given how protracted the conflict between Russia and Ukraine has been, it's probably not a great sign that they're now on similar timelines, but we'll see. Hopefully an end in sight in both conflicts.